But I want to switch over to your involvement with the AIA and mentorship. Um, can you explain some of the roles you've had within the AIA and AIA adjacent?
Yeah, so this might have even been like one of the opening questions, but I think we get there eventually. Is that, um, and I think one of the things I did kind of mention that I think if I look back, really informed how I got involved in that. I felt like I had to build my network from scratch, and so um, first couple of years, I didn't do as much with like the associates level, but I had benefited from uh, kind of AI Philadelphia was doing some area study sessions kind of when I was studying for my tests. And like the minute that maybe the minute, we'll say a couple, I didn't take a big hiatus. Like some people, pass their tests and they go on to the next thing. I think I might have taken like a couple months off and then said, all right, well, how do I kind of get back? And so I hooked up with the person who was running them. Her name's Denise Thompson, and she was the co-chair. Well, she was the area study kind of group chair and kind of the chair of the local YF at the time. And she was running a lot of that by herself, as kind of like someone who had kind of restarted. I think like years ago, there was like a YF locally in Philadelphia, like the early 90s. And then kind of it went dormant for a little period. She brought it back around 2009. So she was really the first person to resurrect it, but doing a lot of it on her own. And so there was limited capacity that I don't want to say one person, because I think I did a lot when I was doing it a lot by myself, but like she had limited when she was doing it. She was doing like, maybe a program every quarter type of thing, or event every quarter. But I wanted to get back. I said, you help me with my study sessions. Like if you had a second person doing this, what could you do? And she said, well, at the very least, we could have, sessions every other week, right? Instead of once a month, we can now run them every other week or something like that, and try to cover more ground. Or we could say that, what, having someone more recent, because I think she had taken an older version of the test. Now I had taken what was 4.0, I think. I can't believe I'm not really remembering, but she was in 3.1, I think, and I was in 4.0. And so like now her knowledge was becoming less relevant to like the next kind of class
Mm-hmm.
of takers. So started like working with her, finding a way to like, kind of again, giving back to what she had helped me do, but then how do we scale this up? And so that was my entree in. And then we said, well, all right, well now I'll architect, let's do some more other types of programming. And I just really started taking off. I mean, I just, between the two of us bouncing ideas off each other, just like, business partners, I think if you think about it, if you're starting your own firm, and I've even thought this and told people that like, I probably wouldn't start my own firm. Like doing the things that I've done with AIA even has kind of given me this insight that like, I enjoy and prefer to have like a partner in probably anything that I do, because as good as I think I might be in different areas, like I don't know everything, and I always like to bounce ideas off of. And so I think we started this rapport where we had different skill sets. She was in healthcare, I was in more like housing, so we knew different kind of sides of kind of architecture and styles, and small firm, larger firm type of thing. So we had a very good dynamic. Just started running lots of programs at the local level. Anything, whether it's a happy hour, whether it's portfolio reviews, more study sessions. We started doing more, which I think was the first, and unfortunately it never really carried on, but we were doing some fellows and young architect events. That was something that the College of Fellows has traditionally had at the national level, a very strong relationship with the YEF, but it doesn't always trickle down to the local level. So we saw that disconnect, and we said, how do we do this? And we did have a series of events, but it didn't have the continuity. But we were always like, how do we keep something? How do we do something new? And we did a lot of kind of integrations or kind of sponsored events that just kind of hadn't, as far as I knew, hadn't been done before. So we wouldn't just do things with architects. We had an event with the American Composers Forum, because we found some common thread in music, and we said, architecture is for us in music. They said, so we had like a design charrette with composers. We had a happy hour with some like makerspace places, like makerspaces and co-working spaces were just kind of starting out around that time. So we said, how do we kind of extend kind of the network to other design kind of fields? And we made some inroads there. We did more with like ULI and with AGC, which locally is called the GVCA. I think Pittsburgh, it's the Master Builders Association, I think is the counterpart.
Yeah.
So we were trying to find more young groups and saying like, how do we like get more collaboration, whether it's an event, an article, a charrette. We did a bunch of design charrettes. So like we were just like just trying to create as a lot of buzz, because at the time, and I think that there still was that. I think emerging professionals feel more heard now, but there wasn't a lot of focus on really anyone like under the age of 45 in AIA, and it was around like 2014. So this is it was just kind of starting, but I think in like 13 or 14, after we had started doing some of this work, like AIA started pivoting to how do we support kind of this next generation. And because we started laying some groundwork, we were kind of at the right time where we started getting tapped for other leadership positions. And so as she kind of, and this is maybe a piece of advice, like if you are in, whether it's AIA or in a firm, if you're able to find someone that maybe is just, there are mentors, but like if you in mentees relationships, but you find someone who's just maybe a couple of years older than you, as they kind of grow, if you can kind of ask on their coattails a little bit maybe and benefit, right? And so one could be like think about like if someone gets a promotion and you're the next person in line, well then you might get a promotion too, because one person got promoted up. Well, now it's your turn to kind of fill that kind of person who's just above you's role. And so I felt a little bit in the AIA world, Denise was elected to the board of directors in 2013, I think it was, or 2012 or 2013. And so she left a void to be the chair of the YF. And so as her co-chair, sometimes you can just be a co-chair for years, but because she was kind of advancing in her AI career, then I kind of filled like the next leadership role. And then I felt like I had an ally on the board, because now here's someone who I've worked with extensively, built that network, and now that person is on the board. It can advocate for me if necessary, and I would advocate for her. And so that kind of started this kind of journey where, like in YF world, and probably in every AI chapter that's kind of maybe a medium size to a large city, like there are different things you can jump around to and find like that. What's the next role? Like how do you climb that next ladder? Not that I was ever considering myself like a corporate ladder climber, but like if you want to grow, I do think that sometimes it means like how do you get that next big role? And so, I went from kind of co-chair, understudy, call it, of local YF to the chair of the committee. And then as my network grew and I had more friends on boards who could vouch for me or write letters for me, what's called the YARD position, which is now called the YAR, Young Architect Representative, which is representing this, at the time it was it still is a single state region. So Pennsylvania still has one, but at the time there was like regions. So like one yard was representing like 4 states sometimes. Pennsylvania had its own. So I was still competing against people from, say, Pittsburgh who wanted to do it. But again, I had people who were vouching for me and writing letters. And so when that position opened up, I already had someone saying, hey, you should do this. So people were kind of helping me like plot my path, because I might not have known that was like a thing. She let me know. So I went from kind of local chair to yard. And then once I was there, I had already been a little bit involved in Connection, which is kind of the magazine, the YF's magazine, E magazine. I had actually kind of built a reputation with the leadership and the rest of the young architects, like regional directors, before I was one, because I was helping out kind of with Connection in 2013 concurrently with some of my YF local experience. And so this is just kind of like the spider webs of like, if you get involved in a lot of things and, even if you don't know where it's going, you kind of open doors to like, jump from one thing to the next, as opportunities present themselves. So, follow this path again. I had, I was in the yard position, but the kind of term for the communications director on the YF kind of advisory committee was opening the following year. And because again, I was involved in Connection and continued my involvement, I had kind of risen to be kind of one of the kind of deputy editors, we'll call it, right? And so there was like two of us that were kind of at the same level. And so one of us was likely going to get it. So I actually didn't have to do a full kind of 2-year term as the yard because this position opened up and I was able to kind of get into that. Again, all kind of aligned with my passions, all aligned with my skill sets, all aligned with like things that just made a lot of sense. And so very quickly, I would call it, went from kind of local chair to national advisory committee member, right? That was really like a 1-year difference between the two because I was so involved. So that was kind of that. And then I think from there, it was like, you kind of get more visibility and people start tapping you and asking you to do different things. So at the peak of my kind of involvement, at that point, I was asked to be on the Philadelphia board, the Pennsylvania board, and I was on the AdCom. So, I had kind of local, state, and national involvement all simultaneously. And so that just kind of really continues to spread like your influence and who you know when you go to when I say you go to conference, then, I know people at every single one of those levels, and generally the ones that are from national, the ones I might not see often. So I would use the time that I had to try to catch up with them for like 3 days that I would be there. So that's, kind of a long-winded thing maybe, but like, that's like a little bit of the arc, right? That's kind of how I got my start. It was like, and again, not unlike maybe being in a small business, is that like, I would say if I'm going to be the chair of this thing, I want this thing to be the most successful. I want people to like come to my events, and I'm the, again, it was two of us, but a lot of times, if Denise was doing one thing, like I might be responsible for like making flyers and promoting and getting people there. And it's like, if I'm going to put all this effort into it, I need to make sure that, there's a critical mass of say 30 people, like 30 people at an event was always a success. If we get 30 people and we would continue to get 30 people, like at, once a month, we're getting people together for like different things. And so, if you're going to put yourself out there, like really do it and figure it out. So I think that's kind of how it served me to get to the next thing. And every level, I would always like, what deliverable can I kind of put out? Like, what can I do? I don't want to just sit in this chair to say that I'm the chair of something or I'm the president of something. Like, I want outcomes to show that, like, in the time I had, I really want to look back and say, like, look at all the stuff that, we accomplished. So,
yeah, more than checking a box, but making a difference in the architect community.
Yeah. And hopefully having fun along the way. Like, I'm not doing these things because someone's twisting my arm. It's like, if someone, again, gives me, what is it that you want to do? And so maybe this is another, like, maybe a career point is like, you might be told what to do in your firm, but if you're doing a volunteer thing and people say, what do you want to do? Well, then I'll give you a little bit of, you might not get a lot of financial resources to do it. So if you're willing to like work with, $1,000 here, $500 there, whatever you can kind of scrap together. And if, I wouldn't say that I was the best fundraiser, but like, if you can, fundraise and get some more money, you know, that's the kind of thing that you can run the thing you want to do. So I wanted, I thought it was important to run and like portfolio reviews.
Mm-hmm.
I created an event we called Elevator Pitch, and the idea was that we would put, instead of having architects just like presenting their designs, it was like, well, and this was around the time Shark Tank was starting up. So I can't say I didn't take inspiration from that, but I said, pretend you are pitching your project to a group of investors or, a client. What is going to make this? So I had to tell people, like, take your designs, like you can still take something, maybe your thesis, but pitch this as if someone's going to buy into it and tell them why they need to do that. And so we found a couple, ran a couple of years in a row and said, and people, well, scared, right? They like didn't know what to do, but I said, well, this is a skill that I think that is really valuable. So, I'll coach you. I'll give you like how I think you should do this. Not that I necessarily had the experience, but I felt, and this is kind of like part of like, the thing of like, making it up as you go maybe. But if you want to create something and then find people to like participate in it, like you have to do the legwork. And so I felt in AIA, I've had that opportunity to say, if I want to create a program, I want to create, some sort of cause, or I want to like advance something that I think is missing, you know, it's up to me to to do that. And others have done this with other, more pressing issue. I think that I'm talking about programming and maybe like mentoring career advancement, but a lot of other people have done this now with justice and climate and, EDI. I think that some of these programs did not exist just 5 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
so people say, well, I want to do it. I want to start a women architecture group. I want to start a justice and inclusion group. I want to start a COAT. Maybe there isn't one in my chapter. And then you can tap into broader resources too, because both, national and state usually have something started. But you'd be surprised. Not every place has these things. So if you have a cause you're interested in and you have the time and talent to do it, to me, that's why I just really enjoyed being involved with AI in particular. It was that I want to help mentor people, but along the way, I think that if people say, hey, give me some ideas and then I'll support you to do it. To me, that's like any special project, right? Like
Yeah.
who else is telling that you can do that?
And I know I get a lot of questions from recent graduates and really young professionals asking me, why should I join the AIA? What would it do for me? Do you have advice that you usually give or comments back when you get those questions?
I mean, I actually don't feel like I've gotten a lot of that questions over the years or that. I mean, I know it is a question, right? People are questioning. I don't know. They've always done. I mean, there might be some questions right now currently, but people have always said like, why do this? Like, why should a firm support it? Right. I haven't always had all my firms support it. So sometimes I had to, pay my own dues, but it's always easier if you have a firm that's at least splitting half of it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, to me, it's still the network that, at I think it's harder in a big city. I mean, I think I would question it more if I was in a smaller chapter. Like, I think maybe if I was in, Lancaster and I didn't have like a critical mass of kind of colleagues who I could meet with, because you might only have like 10 like it's a little bit bigger than that. But if you're, some of these
We
chapters
won't
are
tell them.
really, yeah, some of these chapters, geographically are large, right? So if you look at Pennsylvania, the middle chapter, as it's called,
Mm-hmm.
goes from the New York State to the Maryland State border and from Harrisburg to like Greensburg, right? And in that group, there's like 30 architects. It is very difficult to create like a network at this, what I would see the same value as being like in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
So
even Pittsburgh's smaller than Philly in terms of our chapters, and like we're not as small as Central, but there's still that. if I saw 30 people at an event in Pittsburgh, like that's some of the bigger events, whereas some of the smaller YAF events sometimes get smaller than that. But it's like, okay, there's still like a good collection, but then you kind of get to know people a little bit more at that level when it's smaller. But the committee options vary from chapter to chapter. Like it wasn't until I started looking into what other chapters were doing that it's like, oh, we have a committee of that? Like Pittsburgh doesn't have that. Should we have that? And it just starts a conversation when you start looking at it broader. But I know I always tell people the network side in terms of getting involved and just knowing people in your region, because you never know when you could need a letter of recommendation for some kind of scholarship or grant to go to a conference, or you get laid off. And if you're a young architect, your network may not be that big. You talked about moving to Philly. Like, you didn't have that many college classmates go to Philly, so you didn't have that network. Whereas if you need to pivot or move or change or just see what's going on in other firms to see how you're learning, it's a good way to meet people outside your office.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I could, again, what benefited me, I'll say, if we look at a couple of different things, one, starting at that small firm level and doing a lot of housing, I thought it was important to join the AIA. First it was to give back, but also like for me to expand my own kind of knowledge base about architecture. I'm doing a very small thing, and not that I was necessarily interested in healthcare design, but like if I wasn't going to other events and getting exposed to like different ideas, it could very well just be like doing the same thing in the same small kind of like mentality. And so I think to me, that's a reason why I benefited. So I didn't always have to just be interested in like the day-to-day job, but I think there's also this leadership opportunities. Now, not everybody can be a leader. So in Philadelphia, you have a chapter of 1,500 people, give or take, members. They all can't be leaders of committees. But me personally, if I didn't have the opportunity to lead in my own firm, or I was involved in like a local civic association at the time, like I was searching out for ways to get more leadership experience. And AIA is a natural place, I think, for architects to do that. So whether if you were in AIS or some other, group, or you wanted to just say like, how do I find a way to gain leadership skills? And, I think that you don't know this type of stuff until you go out and you try to like, lead a group of people. Like if you're not doing it at your firm, like you can learn so much by like, again, doing marketing, doing, cold call. I mean, like I can't like, so I'm kind of going back locally, but a lot of the things that I've done program wise required me to just call people, cold. I mean, it's cold. I mean, I might not have called them in the beginning. I think now I'm at a point that I will still cold call people if I want to like do something. If there's a person I want to invite to a panel, I will call them up and pitch. And I think the only reason I have that skill is because of the years I've spent doing an AIA and saying, if I want this thing to be successful, I got to find out how I get a certain contributor, a certain panelist. There's no one else going to do it for me, so I would do it, and I feel comfortable. I think that, especially if you look at, if we haven't even really touched on connection very much, but kind of the thing that was, I still consider my greatest kind of accomplishment was doing this, running this magazine for YF, and what I would say was keeping it to like, I'm going to say whether it's true or not, right? I always like to say, like, I think we were holding like very high journalistic standards, right? We were going after content that would be the same type of content that the AIA National could get. Sure, maybe they could get it more easy or could get it easier because, they just have the clout to do it. But I was getting contributors at that level that would be a feature article in Architect magazine. I think we were able to get those people. to write something or to interview them. And again, the only reason we were doing that was because either me or someone else on my kind of editorial staff was out making those pitches and saying, well, why should I spend my time doing this? Well, this is why, right? This is who it's going to help. This is who's going to read it. This is why I think you should be part of it. We're doing an issue on climate change, resiliency this year, or this month. And so doing that pitching, I think, is the type of thing that, you have to go and give presentations. If I wasn't giving presentations in my work life, this was another way that I could expand and build that skill set. The next time someone asks me to do a presentation, I am ready for it because I have done so much kind of pitching and selling my ideas and trying to convince someone to do something, right?
Yeah, because there's so much you can do, and I even learn through podcasting. I generally just reach out to people. A lot of the times I don't know them ahead of time, and so it's reaching out to see if somebody will talk to me. And sometimes they're busy, and sometimes it's, sure, I'll do it. Let's go for it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to be talking to this person. So,
Yeah, so you probably experienced that, going through this now, is that, I think that sometimes it might not be as heavy a lift as you think it is until you ask, right? And then there's
mhm.
people who you might have to ask again. I don't think there are people that I really hounded, but there are people that I might have pursued who didn't have the time. I'd follow up.
Yep.
I would let them go if unless they were truly saying like, no, I'm not interested. But if someone says I just can't do it this time around, they try to give you an excuse. Well, there's a salesmanship in this.
Check out the full discussion from this bite of advice here. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more mentorDINO content.